Born and raised in Amsterdam, Michael is of Afro-Surinamese descent. Suriname is a country in South America, a former colony of the Netherlands, and Michael certainly has a lot to tell about that history and how it relates to the present. He's focused on fostering a sense of belonging through values-driven and inclusive leadership. Michael, welcome once again to Global Fluency in Action. We're so glad to have you here.
Yes, thank you, Bertine, and I'm also very happy to be here and to chat with you. So, yeah.
Thank you. And as we were talking about in the green room, you and I have spoken before when we first met online, and it was that could have been another podcast episode or several podcast episodes. So Michael and I can talk, I think, for hours about everything along the intersection of inclusion, history, particularly when we were talking about colonization and, community and what that looks like. And language, that's another thing we have in common, data-driven diversity and language. So what we're going to be talking about today is digital equity through the cultural lens. I love the intersection though, right? And I think that speaks to really the experience that we have. And clearly we are two Black people, right?
Yeah.
But we're different ethnicities. As everybody knows, I'm Haitian American. And so we're different ethnicities. We're living in different countries. And I think that's very important to mention because, and this can apply to other races as well, we are not a monolithic group of people. And so our lived experience are going to be different. And data plays a really important role in that, right? So when you and I were talking last time, we were talking about just our experiences as Black people living in different countries. And so I want to get into that as we get further along in our questions. So let's now talk about the three pillars of digital equity. So access to high-speed internet, access to devices, and digital literacy. Why are these of value to society overall? And why are they especially important to underrepresented groups in particular?
Generally, how I feel about digital discrimination, like I tell people all the time, for me, it's just like basically the same old, but just in a different setting. Because, like, for instance, when you look at, I cannot, for instance, really say like, okay, the systems are biased or they are discriminating. Because, like, for instance, when you look at my field, artificial intelligence, I tell people all the time that the term, it kind of suggests real intelligence, but the systems aren't really intelligent. So it's like they might look at patterns and based on that arrive at like what might be the like best decision actions to take based on the patterns that they found in the data. But it's not that the systems actually understand what they're doing. So when it comes to these things such as bias or like video calls not working that well for certain groups of people, the humans are the ones that really need to supervise that. Need to check for that. And if humans don't do that, yeah, that's really has to do with like humans that are basically dropping the ball in that area, because it's easy to point to the systems, but I think like I said, the systems don't really understand it. So humans really need to be aware of that and also really need to care enough about it. Because like if you would like, it's not that people don't know that people look differently. There are different types of people. So it's not that it's like they just found out that actually like there are also Black or brown people. So you already know about that, but you also need to care enough about it to actually test your system. So your products also for that. But one example that I often talk about is also very much related to like the field of healthcare, and that really shows how it also really has to do with like, do people care enough or not? So for instance, in healthcare, you have certain devices called oximeters, and they're basically used to estimate the oxygen level in the blood of people.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing is that the research has shown already a long time ago that those meters, they actually clip them on the fingers of people to estimate those levels. But the research shows that they don't work that well for people with darker skin. But that research was already done in 1990.
Oh my
That's
God.
already 3 decades ago, more than 3 decades ago. So the thing is then that when you know that for so long, you would say like, okay, people would have done something about it. But now, of course, a few years ago, the pandemic hit. And in the pandemic, like, okay, oxygen levels are, of course, very important there, because based on the oxygen levels, you would then determine, like, okay, does someone need extra oxygen, or do they need to be put on a ventilator, etc. But if you then overestimate the levels in the blood of people with darker skin, that means that they only later get the help that they would actually need. And that, yeah, then it's, of course, a question of life and death, which you then have. So that is an area where you then see like, okay, you see certain bias in the systems, but people are aware of it because, like I said, like the research was done in 1990. The researchers actually recommended to the manufacturers that they needed to include more people with darker skin also in the testing calibration of the algorithms. But then 30 years later, more than 30 years later, so the beginning of this year, the same researchers from 1990 came back with a new article. And in that article, they stated that they were not aware of any manufacturers actually having taken the steps to ensure that those oximeters also work for people with darker skin. And then you also really need to ask yourself the question like, okay, is this a problem of bias in technology, or is this a problem of ethical and moral failure of humans? Because if you know about it since 1990 and don't take action, then that has all to do with humans. And even before that in 1990, because like you can say like, okay, maybe for instance, if the research had not been done, you wouldn't know. But then I go back to the point that we were just talking about, like, you know, the world around you, the world does not consist only of white people, or doesn't only consist of white males. So if you then only use those people to test or develop your systems, well, there is a high likelihood that maybe your system only works well for that particular demographic. So in all areas, you see that, yeah, there's a lot of human decision making involved. And I'm like, just be real about certain stuff, because like I tell people all the time, like, okay, I'm in Europe, but my eyes have been open to America since I was a little child. So people, they act all the time like they are shocked about stuff that happens, but all the time that I see stuff happening there, I'm like, yeah, that fits the pattern. Like the historical pattern is so brutal. And I think that's also really ties back again to something that we talked about before. Like when we talk about like the disinformation that people get online, I'm like, it's true they get it online, but long before there was internet and social media, like the most horrific stuff was going on and happening there. So I think it's, even without the internet, I think if people would be honest, they would see that there are like fundamental serious issues underpinning American society, but also European society, that they are unwilling to really address and talk about. And the problem there is like, if you don't address and talk about it, then you add technology on top of that. And then the technology then of course replicates what's already there. And because nobody wants to address and talk about it, also then no one really wants to monitor or check for certain stuff. And then you end up with oximeters that are biased, so even 30 years after the research has been done. So I tell people all the time when it comes to AI, like, because of course I'm in technology, they want to talk to me about the bias in the AI, but I tell people all the time, like, okay, if you want to arrive at ethical AI, you really need ethical humans. Ethical AI is fully dependent upon ethical humans. They need to exhibit ethical behavior, and humans are very much failing in that area. And yeah, I think that's the big thing that we need to solve, because like I can talk all I want about, okay, stuff that you can do, like this is also here. I see Pamela put a comment there, bias, ethical, moral failure of human beings. Yes, that translates into technology indeed. Like I said, I'm more historian than data scientist, and based on history, history from long ago, but also very close to the current day, and also just in the present days, the stuff that goes on. And for me, it's very clear that we really have not solved the issue of humans and ethics. And I think we really need to solve that problem if we want to solve the problem of AI and ethics, because it's just a reflection of human nature, human society, and technology plays in the hands of unethical humans that will yield unethical results and unethical outcomes. So I think that's an important thing. And like I said, like technology is nice, but like everything that we do has to do with humans. And I think that's something that I'm really much focused on, because there's so much when it comes to human rights violations, inequity, etc., that we can't talk about. And when you really get real about it, like I said, like if you just are honest, open your eyes, don't look the other way, then you would see that, well, actually, there's so much nonsense going on that is very much unconscionable. And I'm also one that I don't talk about unconscious bias. I'm like, of course, there's unconscious stuff, but most of it is unconscionable, because like when I go back to the oximeters, if you know for 30 years that it doesn't work that well for people with darker skin and you don't do anything about it, that means that you're fully aware of it, and that is a fully unconscionable act. And I think that's that needs to be said about these things, and because it's not right, but that's the reality that we're facing in a lot of areas.
There's so many wonderful gems that you touched upon.